The moment my son started bragging about inheriting my house, I realized he had already buried me in his mind. He stood there with a glass of bourbon in his hand, smiling for an audience, explaining what renovations he'd make after I was gone. The funny thing? Just 8 hours earlier, I'd signed papers making sure he would never own a single inch of it. Good to see you all. I don't know about you, but the second someone starts planning your funeral while you're still chewing your dinner, something is already very wrong. I'm Bernadette Winslow. I'm 75 years old. I have arthritis in both knees, a stubborn streak that survived 3 decades of marriage, and a Victorian house on Juniper Road that apparently became more valuable to my son than I ever was. The night everything finally cracked started at a restaurant called the Copper Lantern. Now, if you've never been there, imagine dark walnut walls, brass chandeliers, and waiters who pronounce mashed potatoes like they're serving caviar. The kind of place where people order things because they're expensive, not because they actually want to eat them. My son Derek had insisted on the dinner. Family gathering, he called it. Important people will be there, he said. That should have been my first warning. Whenever Derek used the phrase important people, it usually meant people with money. I arrived 5 minutes early. Old habit. My late husband Arthur used to say that if you're on time, you're already late. The hostess led me to a private dining room at the back. Derek was already there. So was his wife Marlene. Their daughter Paige sat quietly near the end of the table scrolling through her phone. Across from them sat Tobias Rusk, a local realtor whose smile always reminded me of a man checking the size of your wallet while shaking your hand. The moment I walked in, Derek looked me up and down. "Mom," he said, "you actually wore that." I looked down at my navy blue jacket. "I've owned it longer than you've owned your personality." Paige snorted into her water. Derek didn't laugh. Marlene definitely didn't. I took my seat. For the first 20 minutes, things stayed civil. Too civil, like actors waiting for the real scene to start. Wine arrived. Then appetizers. Then more wine. Tobias started talking about real estate. That was warning number 2. You see, Derek worked in insurance, not property development. Yet somehow, every conversation that evening kept drifting toward my house. The Winslow house. The house Arthur and I bought 43 years ago. The house where Derek learned to ride a bicycle. The house where Paige baked cookies with me every Christmas. The house where Arthur died peacefully in his favorite chair 9 years earlier. Properties with acreage are becoming rare, Tobias said casually, especially inside town limits. Derek nodded. Exactly. I quietly cut a piece of roasted chicken. Tobias continued. Developers are paying ridiculous money right now. Some of those old estates can be transformed into boutique inns. Marlene smiled. Or wedding venues. Derek leaned back. That's what I've been saying. I noticed something strange. Nobody at the table was talking about my house like it belonged to me. They talked about it like it was already inventory, already available, already transferred. I kept eating. Sometimes silence tells you more than questions. The conversation rolled on. Property values, tourism, historic renovations, tax benefits. Every road somehow led back to Juniper Road, back to my home. Then Tobias made a mistake. He asked Derek, "Have you settled on what you'd keep and what you'd tear down?" I stopped chewing, not visibly, just enough. Derek answered immediately. "The winter garden goes." Marlene nodded. "Definitely." My hand tightened around my fork. The winter garden. Arthur spent 2 summers building it. Every pane of glass had passed through his hands. Every cedar beam had been measured twice because he never trusted himself the first time. When he finished it, he stood there covered in sawdust and said, "Now we'll grow old somewhere sunny." And now my son wanted it demolished. Without even asking, without even pretending. The workshop too, Derek continued. Waste of space. The land behind it could fit 6 luxury guest suites. My appetite disappeared. Not because I was angry, not yet, because suddenly everything made sense. The surprise dinner, the realtor, the fake smiles, the expensive restaurant. They weren't celebrating family. They were discussing future assets. My future assets. A waiter arrived carrying another round of drinks. Derek raised his bourbon. "Actually," he said, grinning, "I've got a toast." Everyone looked at him. He stood, straightened his jacket, and smiled like a man already cashing a check. To family. Glasses lifted. To hard work. More nodding. Then came the part he should have kept inside his head. To the Winslow house. Tobias grinned. Marlene grinned. Even before he finished, I knew what was coming. The inheritance that will finally put this family ahead. The room filled with polite laughter. Someone clinked a glass. Someone said, "Here, here." And my son stood there smiling. Not one word about me. Not one word about Arthur. Not one word about memories. Just inheritance. Property, money, square footage. I looked around the table. Paige had stopped smiling. Even she looked uncomfortable. Derek didn't notice. He was enjoying himself too much. Then he added the sentence that changed everything. "Once Mom's gone, we'll finally be able to do something useful with that place." The silence afterward lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt much longer. I set down my fork, folded my napkin, looked directly at my son, and smiled. Because 8 hours earlier, I'd walked out of Attorney Vivian Calder's office carrying a signed copy of documents that would destroy every plan Derek had spent years building. I took a sip of iced tea. Then I said 4 simple words. "About that, Derek." His smile froze, and for the first time all evening, he looked nervous. The look on Derek's face was worth every mile I'd driven that morning. Not because I enjoy humiliating people. I don't. At 75, revenge sounds exhausting. But there is a special kind of satisfaction in watching someone realize they've been counting money that was never theirs. "About what?" Derek asked. The confidence was still there, but it had cracked around the edges. I dabbed my lips with a napkin. "The house." Nobody spoke. Even Tobias stopped smiling. Derek laughed awkwardly. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I tilted my head. "The fact that you're discussing renovations to property you don't own." Marlene crossed her arms. "Technically, it'll be his someday." There it was. Not if, not hopefully, not many years from now. Just a simple assumption. Like they were discussing tomorrow's weather. I looked at her. "No, dear, it won't." The table went silent. Derek leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means the house is no longer part of your inheritance." Paige looked up immediately. Tobias blinked. Marlene frowned, and Derek laughed again. Only this time, nobody joined him. "Okay, seriously." "I'm being serious." I opened my purse and removed a folded document. Not the entire packet, just enough. The heading alone changed the atmosphere. Vivian Calder's law firm wasn't exactly unknown in Briar Glen. People noticed that name, especially people who dealt with property. Tobias practically stopped breathing. Derek grabbed the paper. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then the first again. Color slowly drained from his face. "What the hell is this?" "A charitable trust." The words landed like bricks. Marlene sat upright. "A what?" "A charitable trust." I took another sip of tea. "The house has been transferred." Derek stared at me. "No. Yes. You can't just—" "I can." His voice rose. "You gave away the house?" "I did." Tobias suddenly found his water glass fascinating. Smart man. He already understood this conversation was becoming dangerous. Derek looked back at the document. His hands were shaking. "To who?" I smiled. Now came the part I'd been waiting for. Whisker Harbor Cat Rescue. The room froze. Literally froze. Even the waiter approaching with dessert slowed down. Marlene laughed first. A loud, nervous laugh. Then another. Then she realized nobody else was laughing. "You're joking." "I'm not." "Mom," Derek said quietly. Too quietly. That scared me more than shouting. "Tell me you're joking." "I'm not." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Paige covered her mouth. Not because she was upset. Because she was trying not to laugh. That nearly finished Derek. "You gave my inheritance to a cat shelter?" I corrected him. "No. I gave my house to a cat shelter." The difference mattered. His jaw tightened. "You've completely lost your mind." There it was. The first card. Whenever people stop getting what they want, they suddenly start questioning your sanity. Convenient, isn't it? I passed every competency evaluation this morning. That caught him off guard, because I could see exactly where his thoughts had gone. Doctor, lawyer, challenge the paperwork, claim confusion, claim age, claim manipulation. I'd already closed those doors. "You planned this?" he asked. "For months." The silence afterward felt heavy. Across the table, Tobias slowly set down his fork. The man looked like he wished he'd accepted literally any other dinner invitation. Then Derek asked the question that told me everything. Not why. Not, "Are you happy?" Not even, "What happens now?" Instead, he asked, "How much is left?" And just like that, every doubt disappeared. Because a son worried about his mother would have asked 100 different questions. Only one kind of son asks that one first. I leaned back, smiled, and realized the real fight hadn't even started yet. Because Derek Winslow still believed he could undo what I'd done. And he was about to spend the next few weeks learning exactly how wrong he was. I wish I could tell you I walked out of that restaurant feeling victorious. I didn't. I felt tired. There's a difference. Victory is exciting. What I felt was the exhaustion of finally putting down a burden I'd been carrying for years. The rest of dinner collapsed quickly. Nobody touched their dessert. The pecan pie sat untouched. The crème brûlée arrived and cooled. Even the expensive bourbon Derek had been showing off suddenly looked pointless. For almost 10 minutes, he kept reading the same page, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something he liked better. Finally, he looked up. "When did you do this?" "This morning." His eyes widened. "This morning?" "About 9:30. Marlene shook her head. "No normal person wakes up and gives away a house." I smiled. "No normal son plans renovations for a property before the owner is dead." That one landed. Paige immediately looked down at her lap. I could see her shoulders shaking. The poor girl was trying not to laugh. Derek noticed. "Paige." "What?" This isn't funny. She looked at him. Dad, you literally toasted Grandma's inheritance. Nobody had an answer for that, not even Tobias, especially not Tobias. In fact, the realtor had become strangely interested in his phone. The man looked like he wanted to disappear into another dimension. Then Derek tried a different approach, the guilt approach. Mom? He lowered his voice. Why would you do this to your family? That question almost impressed me. Almost, because it sounded reasonable, until you thought about it for more than 3 seconds. I folded my hands. You mean the same family that was discussing demolition plans for my home while I was sitting here? His jaw tightened. That's not what happened. Oh? No. So the winter garden wasn't being removed? Silence. The workshop wasn't being torn down. More silence. The guest suites weren't already being planned? Marlene suddenly jumped in. You're twisting everything. I laughed. Actually laughed. The first genuine laugh of the evening. At my age, dear, I don't need to twist anything. People usually tell me exactly who they are. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Tobias finally cleared his throat. Maybe I should head out. Smartest thing he'd said all night. Derek turned toward him immediately. No, stay. Tobias looked trapped. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The check arrived shortly afterward. An expensive check. The kind that makes people pretend not to notice the waiter standing nearby. Derek reached for it automatically, then paused. For years, I'd often covered family dinners, birthdays, graduations, anniversaries. I knew exactly what he was thinking. Maybe I'd rescue him again. Maybe I'd play my usual role, the convenient wallet. I picked up my purse. Derek glanced at me hopefully. I stood. Good night, everyone. His expression changed instantly. Wait. No. Mom. You seem to have everything under control. The waiter remained perfectly still, professional enough not to react, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Derek lowered his voice. You're really leaving? Yes. What about the bill? I looked at him. Really looked at him, and suddenly remembered every loan, every emergency, every favor. Every time I'd said yes, then I smiled. The inheritance should cover it. Even Paige lost the battle at that point. A snort escaped before she could stop it. I walked out of the copper lantern without looking back. The night air felt cool against my face. My knees hurt. My back hurt. My arthritis certainly wasn't celebrating. But for the first time in years, something felt lighter. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A text from June Bellamy. How did dinner go? I stared at the message for several seconds, then typed back, 40 cats just inherited a Victorian mansion. 3 dots appeared. You're kidding. I looked toward the restaurant windows glowing across the parking lot. Inside, my son was probably still trying to figure out how a future he'd already spent had disappeared in a single day. I smiled and sent one final message, not even a little. That was when I heard the restaurant door burst open behind me, and Derek shouting my name across the parking lot. The real war was beginning. Derek! I kept walking, not because I couldn't hear him. The man was loud enough to wake people 3 counties away. I simply wasn't interested. Mom! His shoes slapped against the pavement behind me. I reached my Buick and unlocked the driver's door. A second later, his hand landed on the frame before I could get inside. You're not leaving. I looked at him calmly. That's an interesting thing to say to the owner of a car. His breathing was heavy. Not from running, from panic. The confident man from dinner was gone, the future hotel owner, the inheritance expert, the man who had been discussing guest suites over appetizers. Now, he just looked scared. "You're seriously giving the house away?" "Yes." "To cats?" "To a shelter." "Mom, this is insane." I sighed. "No, Derek. What's insane is sitting across from your living mother and talking about her property like she's already in the cemetery." His face tightened. "That's not what happened." "That's exactly what happened." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The restaurant door opened behind him. People were beginning to leave. A few glanced our way. Derek noticed. His voice immediately dropped. He didn't want an audience. Interesting. "You need to reverse this." "No." "Listen to me." "No." "Mom." "No." Every answer came easier than the last. His frustration grew visibly. I'd spent years explaining myself, defending myself, trying to avoid conflict. Now I was discovering how powerful a simple no could be. "You don't understand what you've done." I almost laughed. "Actually, I understand it perfectly. Dad would have hated this." That one hit harder. Not because he was right, because he knew exactly where to aim. Arthur had been gone 9 years, and Derek still pulled him out whenever he needed emotional leverage. I closed my car door, slowly, carefully. Then I looked directly at him. "Don't use your father." His eyes shifted away, just for a second. Long enough. Because he knew. Arthur would have hated what Derek had become far more than he would have hated my decision. My husband believed in earning things, building things, respecting people, especially family. You think Dad would have approved of turning his workshop into luxury guest suites? Derek said nothing. You think he'd approve of treating his house like a future paycheck? Nothing again. The silence answered for him. A cold wind moved through the parking lot. For a few moments, all I heard was traffic from Main Street. Then Derek changed tactics. Again. That was always his gift. Not honesty. Adaptation. The second one approach failed. He tried another. What about Paige? There it was. The granddaughter card. What about her? She'll lose everything too. I stared at him. Actually stared. The nerve of that statement almost impressed me. Paige is 24. So? So if she's counting on my death to finance her future, then I've failed as a grandmother. His mouth opened, then closed. No response. Because Paige wasn't counting on anything. Derek was. The more we talked, the clearer it became. This was never about family security. It wasn't even about the house. It was about losing control of an asset he'd already mentally spent. Then my phone buzzed. June Bellamy. I answered. Bernadette? Her voice sounded nervous. Everything okay? I looked at Derek standing 3 feet away. Depends on your definition. A pause. Then June lowered her voice. I just got a call. My stomach tightened slightly. What kind of call? Someone asked if the shelter had legal ownership of your property. I looked directly at my son. His expression told me everything. The call hadn't come from curiosity. It had come from strategy. The war had officially started. June continued. The caller wanted copies of our paperwork. I nodded slowly. Did you give them anything? Of course not. Good. Very good. because June Bellamy might spend her days rescuing abandoned cats, but she wasn't stupid, not even close. After I ended the call, Derek already knew I'd figured it out. You called them. I was asking questions. You were fishing for weaknesses. No. Yes. His jaw tightened. Then he said something that finally erased the last traces of sympathy I still had for him. If you keep going with this, don't expect me to help you when you're older. For a second, I just stared. 75 years old, arthritis, blood pressure medication, reading glasses in every room. And somehow, my son thought that threat would scare me. I smiled, a real smile. Older? The confusion on his face was immediate. I stepped closer. Derek. What? I'm already older? The answer hit harder than any insult. Because it exposed the truth. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about losing something he thought belonged to him. And for the first time all evening, he seemed to realize I wasn't backing down. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. I got into my car, started the engine, and left him standing alone in the parking lot, watching his inheritance drive away. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Not because of excitement, because my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls, texts, voicemails, Derek, Marlene, Derek again, then Marlene again. I made coffee first. At 75, panic can wait until after caffeine. The messages were almost entertaining. Call me now. This has gone too far. We need to talk. Mom, this isn't funny. Funny. That word kept appearing, as if everyone believed I was playing some elaborate prank, as if 40 years of property ownership could be undone with a punchline. I ignored every message. Instead, I walked into my winter garden. Morning sunlight spilled through Arthur's glass panels. The lemon tree he'd planted years ago was still alive. Barely. Stubborn thing. Just like him. Just like me. I was watering the plants when my doorbell rang. Once, twice, then repeatedly, impatiently. I already knew who it was. Sure enough, Derek stood on my porch, Marlene beside him. Neither looked happy. I opened the door but didn't invite them inside. Mom. Good morning, Derek. We need to talk. His voice carried the same tone people use when informing a hostage negotiation team. Marlene crossed her arms. You've embarrassed this family. I nearly laughed. By donating my own property? You blindsided everyone. No. I shook my head. You blindsided yourselves. That answer didn't help. Derek stepped closer. Let's be rational. Whenever someone begins a sentence with let's be rational, irrational nonsense usually follows. You made your point, he said. Now reverse it. No. Marlene exhaled sharply. You're acting emotionally. I looked around my porch, the hanging ferns, Arthur's wind chime, the old rocking chair. Then back at her. Actually, I spent 6 months planning it. Neither of them liked that answer, because emotional decisions can be challenged. Careful decisions are much harder to attack. Derek rubbed his forehead. What exactly did we do to deserve this? That question surprised me. Not because he asked it, because he genuinely seemed confused. As if the answer wasn't obvious. As if last night's dinner had happened to someone else. I looked directly at him. You stopped seeing me. Silence. You saw the house? More silence. You saw the land? Nothing. You saw inheritance. Derek's eyes shifted away, and there it was, the truth. Not spoken, just exposed. A long moment passed. Then another. Finally, I smiled. Not cruelly, just honestly. You know what's funny? Neither answered. The cat shelter treats me more like family than my own family does. That landed hard, because neither one could argue with it. And for the first time since arriving, Derek looked worried for a reason that had nothing to do with money. Because deep down, he knew I meant every word. By noon, half of Briar Glen seemed to know what I'd done. Small towns are like that. A secret can travel faster than Wi-Fi. I spent most of the morning at Whisker Harbor Cat Rescue, helping June move supplies into a storage room they'd recently rented. Nothing glamorous, just boxes of blankets, cat food, medication, and enough litter to survive a minor apocalypse. Frankly, it was more enjoyable than talking to my son. June was labeling shelves when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then sighed. "Derek, again?" I asked. She nodded. "Third time." "What does he want now?" "He keeps asking for a meeting." I wasn't surprised. People become very interested in communication when they realize they're losing. June set the phone down. "I haven't answered." "Good." She smiled. "You know, most people donate money." I laughed. "Most people don't have Derek." That earned a genuine laugh. A few nearby volunteers looked over. One of them, an older man named Warren, nearly dropped a bag of kibble from laughing. The shelter wasn't fancy. Old floors, old walls, old furniture. But there was something peaceful about it. Nobody there cared what was in my will. Nobody cared how much my house was worth. Nobody cared about future inheritance. The cats certainly didn't. Captain Pickle climbed into my lap as if he owned the place. To be fair, he behaved that way everywhere. My phone buzzed again. Derek. Ignored, then again. Ignored. Then a text appeared. "If you won't talk to me, I'll talk to Vivian." I showed the screen to June. She winced. "That sounds expensive." "That's because it is." Vivian called her, billed by the hour. And she enjoyed dealing with entitled people far more than she admitted. An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Vivian in her office. The silver dragonfly clip in her hair was there as usual. So was her expression, the one that suggested she already knew everything. "He called," she said. "How bad?" Vivian actually smiled. "Your son informed me that you've been manipulated by cat enthusiasts." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Cat enthusiasts? His words. "What did you tell him?" I told him I had personally reviewed every document, every medical evaluation, every witness statement, and every recording. She took a sip of tea. Then I informed him he was welcome to challenge the trust. I smiled. "And?" He asked if he could win. That sounded like Derek, always looking for the shortcut, the angle, the loophole. "The answer?" I asked. Vivian folded her hands. "I told him he'd have a better chance teaching cats to pay property taxes." That was the first time all week I genuinely felt hopeful. Because Derek still believed there was a legal escape hatch. There wasn't. Everything had been done correctly, carefully, patiently. 6 months of preparation. 6 months of signatures, evaluations, recordings, filings, and approvals. He wasn't fighting a sudden decision. He was fighting a fortress. Then Vivian's expression became more serious. "There's something else." My smile faded. "What?" She opened a folder. Inside sat several printed documents. Property projections, development plans, financial estimates. My stomach tightened. Derek provided these to a developer 3 months ago. I stared at the pages: luxury suites, event venue concepts, projected revenue, future sale estimates. My house, my land, my workshop, my winter garden. Every inch of it. Already calculated, already priced, already sold in his mind. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Not because I was shocked, because seeing it on paper hurt more than hearing it at dinner. Vivian watched me quietly. Finally, I exhaled. He really thought it was his. She nodded. Looks that way. I stared at the documents, then slowly closed the folder. Vivian raised an eyebrow. No, he didn't think it was his. I stood up. The realization hit me all at once. He thought I was already gone. And somehow, that felt even worse. 3 days later, Derek stopped pretending this was about family. The mask finally slipped. Until then, he'd been cycling through every version of the same argument. Think about Paige. Think about the family. Think about your legacy. Funny thing about manipulation, eventually, people run out of disguises. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of chicory coffee and a crossword puzzle when Paige's car pulled into the driveway. She climbed out looking frustrated. Not angry. Frustrated. There was a difference. Grandma? Morning, sweetheart. She sat beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. Dad's losing his mind. I wasn't surprised. How bad? He spent 40 minutes this morning talking about cat law. I nearly spilled my coffee. Cat law? He was Googling whether animal charities can lose property rights. That sounded exactly like Derek. When reality refused to cooperate, he tried arguing with reality itself. Paige shook her head. I've never seen him like this. I looked at her carefully. Unlike her father, Paige still knew how to feel embarrassed. That gave me hope. What else is going on? She hesitated, then reached into her bag. There's something you should see. She handed me a folder. A thick one. My stomach tightened immediately. What's this? Dad's office paperwork. I looked up. Paige. I know. Her voice was quiet. I wasn't snooping. Then how? He left it open on his desk. That sounded believable. Derek had never been particularly organized. I opened the folder. The first few pages were financial projections. The next pages were property evaluations, then architectural sketches, then projected renovation costs, then projected annual profits. My fingers stopped moving. I recognized the address immediately. Juniper Road. My house, every page, every projection, every calculation. My house. Paige watched my expression change. There's more. I turned another page, and another, then another. Each one somehow worse than the last. Projected demolition of the winter garden. Removal of Arthur's workshop. Guest parking expansion. Outdoor wedding venue. Luxury cottage additions. Projected revenue after 5 years. I sat completely still, not speaking, not moving, just reading. Because suddenly I understood something. Derek hadn't started planning after Arthur died. He hadn't started planning last year, or even 6 months ago. Some of these documents were nearly 3 years old. 3 years. For 3 years, he'd been preparing for ownership of a house that wasn't his. 3 years of treating my future death like a business opportunity. Paige finally broke the silence. I'm sorry. I looked up. For what? For not seeing it sooner. My heart softened immediately. That wasn't her burden to carry. I squeezed her hand. "This isn't your fault." She nodded, but she still looked miserable. Then she pointed toward one page. "Look at the date." I did. My stomach dropped, because I recognized it. The date wasn't random, not even close. It was the anniversary of Arthur's funeral. The same day I'd spent sitting alone in the cemetery with flowers. The same day I'd cried beside my husband's grave. The same day Derek had apparently been discussing future development plans for the property. For a moment, the anger hit harder than it ever had before. Not loud anger, cold anger, the dangerous kind, the kind that settles quietly. Paige saw it in my face. "Grandma?" I slowly closed the folder, then stood. "What are you doing?" I picked up my purse. "My son wants to treat my house like a business investment." She blinked. "Okay." I looked down the road toward town, toward Derek's office, and toward the consequences he'd been avoiding. Then it's time he learns what happens when investments go bad. For the first time since all this started, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was moving first. And Derek had absolutely no idea what was coming. I drove to Derek's office that afternoon, not because I intended to argue. I'd done enough arguing for one lifetime. No, I went because I wanted to look him in the eye while he still believed he could fix this. His office sat on the second floor of a brick building downtown. Insurance, investments, retirement planning. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man who advised strangers how to secure their futures had spent years gambling on mine ending at a convenient time. Paige came with me. She insisted, partly because she was worried about me, mostly because she didn't trust her father anymore. Neither did I. We found Derek through the glass walls of a conference room. The moment he saw us, his expression changed. Hope. Then confusion. Then caution. He stepped outside. "Mom." I handed him the folder. Nothing else, just the folder. His eyes immediately narrowed. "Where did you get this?" Interesting. Not "what is this?" Not "why do you have it?" He already knew exactly what it was. "You recognize it." Silence. Paige folded her arms. "Dad." His jaw tightened. "Paige, stay out of this." "No." For the first time, she sounded more like Arthur than Derek. Calm, direct, uncomfortable for dishonest people. "You've been planning this for years." Derek looked away. That alone answered the question. I tapped the folder. The winter garden. Nothing. The workshop. Nothing. The guest suites. Still nothing. Then I opened to the page with Arthur's funeral date. That finally got his attention. His face lost color. Just a little, but enough. "You really did this that day." For a second, he couldn't answer. The hallway suddenly felt very quiet. Employees walked by, pretending not to listen. Every one of them listening. Finally, Derek sighed. "It was just business." I stared at him. And in that moment, I realized something important. He actually believed that explanation helped him. Business. As though that transformed betrayal into professionalism. As though spreadsheets erased loyalty. "Business?" I repeated. "Mom, your father's funeral anniversary." He rubbed his forehead. "We were exploring options. While I was at the cemetery." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Paige spoke. Quietly. "You were really waiting for Grandma to die." The words hit harder than anything I'd said. Because they came from his daughter, not me. His eyes widened. That's not fair, isn't it? Paige looked close to tears now. I kept defending you. Derek suddenly looked trapped, cornered. Not by documents, by truth. And that's always harder. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed immediately. Panic. Real panic. He answered, Derek Winslow. A pause, then more silence. Then, what do you mean the deposit? Another pause. His face went pale. Very pale. I didn't know who was calling, but I knew bad news when I saw it. How much? He asked. The answer clearly wasn't small. When the call ended, he just stood there, frozen. What happened? Paige asked. Derek looked at neither of us. The developer. My stomach tightened. North Star. The developer pulled out. Now things made sense. Without the house, there was no future project. Without the future project, there was no investment. Without the investment, the money disappeared. How much did you lose? I asked. He swallowed, then finally admitted it. 40,000. The number hung in the air. Paige closed her eyes. I just stared, because suddenly I understood why he'd been fighting so desperately. It had never been only about inheritance. He'd already spent money he didn't actually have. Money tied to a future that belonged to me. And that future had just vanished. For the first time since all this started, Derek looked genuinely afraid. Not angry, not manipulative. Afraid. And something told me the worst part still hadn't surfaced. Because people don't lose $40,000 without making even bigger mistakes first. I found out what the $40,000 really meant 2 days later. And believe me, it was worse than I expected. Much worse. The call came from Vivian Calder. I was at Whisker Harbor helping June assemble new cat towers. Captain Pickle was supervising from the top shelf like a furry foreman who hadn't approved the construction plans. My phone buzzed. Bernadette, Vivian said, are you sitting down? No. You should. That is never a comforting sentence. I found an empty chair. What happened? Vivian paused, then exhaled. I finally received the documents from North Star Hospitality. My stomach tightened. And the $40,000 wasn't an investment loss. I frowned. What does that mean? It means Derek already spent it. For several seconds, I said nothing. Then, spent what? The advance. The room suddenly felt colder. June noticed my expression immediately. What is it? I held up a finger, still listening. Vivian continued. North Star gave him a consulting advance almost 8 months ago. 8 months, not weeks, months. My grip tightened around the phone. He took money based on a property he didn't own? Correct. Without telling me? Correct. And now they want it back? Immediately. I closed my eyes. There it was, the real panic. The real reason behind the endless calls, the legal threats, the guilt trips, the sudden concern for family. Derek wasn't fighting for a future inheritance. He was fighting a debt he created himself. How bad? I asked. Vivian was quiet. Too quiet. Finally, she answered. 40,000 was only the advance. I didn't like the word only. What else is there? A contract. Of course there was. There was always a contract. I leaned back in the chair. Tell me. The agreement guaranteed future development rights once ownership transferred. My heart sank, because I already knew what that meant. North Star had expected the property, not hoped for it. Expected it. Someone had convinced them ownership was practically guaranteed. And that someone was my son. He promised them the house, essentially. June sat down across from me. She could tell this wasn't getting better. It wasn't. Vivian continued. North Star's attorneys are now arguing they were misled. I laughed once. A short, humorless laugh. Good luck proving they weren't. That appears to be their position. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. For years, Derek had treated my house like a future paycheck. Now that paycheck had bounced, and the people holding the receipt were angry. Very angry. That evening, Paige showed up again. She already knew something was wrong. I could tell by the way she walked into the kitchen. Dad got served. I looked up. Already? She nodded. A legal notice. Formal demand, 30 days. The whole thing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Paige quietly sat down. I didn't know. I know. He never told us. I know. Tears filled her eyes. Not because of the money, because of the lie. Because every new fact made the picture uglier. Then she said something that stayed with me. Grandma. What? I think Dad stopped seeing people. I looked at her. He only sees outcomes now. That hit hard, because she was right. Somewhere along the way, Derek had stopped looking at his mother, stopped looking at anyone. All he saw were opportunities, assets, returns, profits, future gains. And now the future he'd built inside his head was collapsing. One lawsuit at a time. But the biggest shock arrived the following morning. Because Vivian called again. And this time, she had discovered something even worse than the money. Something that explained why Derek was suddenly becoming desperate, and why Tobias Rusk had stopped answering his phone. The next call from Vivian arrived at 8:17 the following morning. I remember the exact time because I was standing in my kitchen trying to convince Captain Pickle that my bacon was not community property. The cat disagreed strongly. Bernadette. Vivian's voice was unusually flat. That was never good. What happened? I found Tobias. That got my attention immediately. For nearly a week, the realtor had vanished. No calls, no emails, no explanations, just silence. Where? His attorney contacted me. My stomach tightened. And? Vivian paused. He wants immunity. Now I put the bacon down, because things had just become interesting. From what? The statements he's prepared to make. I sat slowly at the kitchen table. Across the room, Captain Pickle finally stole the bacon. I didn't even stop him. Tobias is talking? Very much. About Derek? Mostly. A knot formed in my stomach. Not because I was worried, because I already suspected the answer. People don't hire lawyers because of innocent conversations. What did he say? Vivian took a breath, then delivered the sentence that changed everything. He has emails. I closed my eyes. Of course he did. Every arrogant person eventually creates evidence. Some just do it more thoroughly than others. How many? Hundreds. Hundreds! 3 years' worth. For several seconds I couldn't speak. 3 years. The same number that appeared in those development plans. The same number that kept surfacing. 3 years of preparation. 3 years of assumptions. 3 years of spending an inheritance that didn't exist. Then Vivian continued, and Bernadette. Yes, some of them are ugly. Very ugly, as it turned out. That afternoon we met at her office. Paige came too. She deserved to know. Vivian placed a printed stack on the conference table. Nobody touched it at first. The pile looked thick enough to stop a bullet. Finally, she opened to one page. Read this. I did. The first email was from Derek, 2 years ago. Subject line, Future Property Development Timeline. My chest tightened. I kept reading. Then another page. Then another. Everyone somehow worse. Projected ownership dates. Future sale estimates. Potential investor lists. Projected demolition schedules. Renovation concepts. Projected profit margins. Everything. Everything except one detail. Me. I wasn't mentioned once. Not as a mother. Not as a homeowner. Not as a person. Just an obstacle, an eventuality, a waiting period. Then I found the email that finally made me put the papers down. I couldn't even finish it. Paige grabbed it, read it, and immediately went pale. What is it? Vivian asked. Paige swallowed, then looked at me. Dad wrote. She couldn't finish. I took the paper back, forced myself to read the line. Once Bernadette is no longer occupying the property, development can begin immediately. Occupying, not living. Occupying. Like I was a piece of furniture, or a storage container, or a problem waiting to expire. At that moment, the office became completely silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then Paige quietly wiped away a tear. I can't believe he wrote that. Neither could I. And yet there it was. Black ink, white paper, no excuses, no interpretations. Just truth. I've seen a lot of family stories, but when a son starts describing his own mother like she's a temporary tenant in her own life, the problem stopped being money a long time ago. That's not greed anymore. That's entitlement with a calendar attached. 3 days later came the city council meeting. The final battle. The approval hearing for Arthur Winslow Memorial Cat Sanctuary. The room was packed. Neighbors, reporters, volunteers, council members, even a few curious residents who had only come because somebody told them a man had lost a mansion to 40 cats. Derek arrived with his attorney. Marlene sat beside him. Tobias appeared too, looking considerably less confident than usual. The hearing began normally. Then Derek made the mistake that ended everything. He stood up, pointed toward me, and said, "That house was supposed to be mine." The room went silent. Completely silent. Even Derek seemed to realize what he'd just admitted. Because for the first time he hadn't talked about family, or concern, or fairness, or legacy. Just ownership. Mine, not Mom's, not Bernadette's. Mine. And everyone heard it. Every single person in that room. I slowly stood, looked directly at my son, and said, "That may be the most honest thing you've said in years?" Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. The damage was already done. The council approved the sanctuary 15 minutes later. Unanimously. And as Derek sat there staring at the floor, I realized something. I hadn't taken anything from him. I'd simply stopped giving him something he never owned. And somehow, that hurt him even more. After the council vote, I expected Derek to disappear for a while. Most people would. Most people would lick their wounds, hire a lawyer, maybe blame fate. My son chose a different approach. He showed up at my house at 9:30 that night, alone. For the first time in weeks, No Marlene, no attorney, no Tobias, just Derek. The porch camera alerted me before he even knocked. Paige had installed it after the council hearing. Just in case Grandpa's favorite child forgets his manners, she'd said. Smart girl. I watched him stand there through the app for almost a minute before opening the door. He looked exhausted, older, like he'd aged several years in a few days. Mom? I didn't invite him in. What do you want? His eyes drifted toward the house, toward the windows, toward the workshop, toward everything he'd spent years planning to own. Then he surprised me. I messed up. I said nothing. Because after everything that had happened, words weren't worth much. I know you don't believe me. Still nothing. And maybe you shouldn't. That was probably the most honest thing he'd said all month. For a few seconds, we stood there in silence. Then he sighed. The investors want their money. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because there it was. The real issue. Again, not our relationship, not family, not regret, money. Always money. They should. He flinched. I can fix it. No, Derek. I can. No. His jaw tightened. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. The porch light cast shadows across his face. For the first time, I noticed how tired he looked, how scared. And strangely enough, I didn't enjoy it. I wasn't happy he'd failed. I was sad he'd become this person. Mom? He hesitated, then quietly asked, was I really that bad? The question caught me off guard. Not because of what he asked, because he sounded sincere. Maybe for the first time. I looked at him carefully, then answered honestly. No. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Then I finished. You became that bad slowly. That hit harder. I could tell, because it was true. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to value property more than people. It happens inch by inch, excuse by excuse, shortcut by shortcut. Until one day you look around and realize you've lost sight of what's important. Derek lowered his head. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up. What happens now? I glanced past him toward Arthur's workshop. Volunteers had already started preparing the first sanctuary rooms. Through the window, I could see cat trees waiting to be assembled. A future was already being built. Just not the one Derek wanted. Now, I said, now you deal with the consequences of your own decisions. He nodded slowly, like he already knew there was no other answer. Then he turned and walked toward his car. Halfway down the path, he stopped. For a moment, I thought he was going to argue again. Instead, he asked one final question. Do you think Dad would have been disappointed in me? The night suddenly felt very quiet. I thought about Arthur, his workshop, his values, the life we'd built. Then I answered. I think your father would have been disappointed that you forgot what mattered. Derek stood still for several seconds, then got into his car and drove away. I watched the taillights disappear down Juniper Road. Something told me that wasn't the end, because while Derek had finally stopped fighting me, the truth about everything he'd done was only beginning to spread through Briar Glen. And the next surprise wouldn't come from me. It would come from someone much closer to him. 3 weeks later, the first cats moved into Arthur Winslow Memorial Cat Sanctuary. If you'd told me 6 months earlier that my husband's workshop would become home to rescued cats, I would have laughed. Arthur probably would have laughed too, then he would have started building shelves. The old workshop looked different now. Fresh paint, new flooring, large climbing towers, sunlit resting platforms by the windows. The brass weather vane shaped like a cat had finally been installed on the roof. June cried when she saw it, pretended she wasn't crying. But she was. The sanctuary opened on a Saturday. Half the town showed up. Families, volunteers, local reporters, children carrying bags of cat treats. Even Mayor Ellison stopped by long enough to take pictures with Captain Pickle, who immediately tried to steal the mayor's tie. Some things never change. The article Paige wrote ended up spreading far beyond Briar Glen. It wasn't about me, at least not entirely. It was about protecting elderly homeowners from financial pressure and inheritance manipulation. The story traveled. People shared it, talked about it, recognized parts of their own families in it. And that was when Derek's life became very uncomfortable. Not because I attacked him. I didn't. I never gave interviews criticizing him. Never called him names. Never publicly humiliated him. The truth did all the work for me. People learned about the development plans, the emails, the investor agreements, the assumptions, the inheritance calculations. The phrase, "once Bernadette is no longer occupying the property." That one followed him everywhere, because nobody could forget it. North Star eventually settled with him. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't cheap. And Tobias quietly disappeared from most local business circles. Funny how quickly people vanish when paperwork starts talking. As for Marlene, she moved in with her sister for a while. Not permanently, just long enough to decide whether she still trusted her husband. From what Paige told me, that answer kept changing depending on the day. Then one afternoon, about 2 months after the council meeting, Derek came back. No lawyers, no demands, no arguments, just Derek. I was sitting on the porch drinking chicory coffee, while Captain Pickle slept beside my chair. He climbed the steps, slowly, like someone approaching a place he no longer recognized. "Mom." "Hello, Derek." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he held out a cardboard box. I frowned. "What's that?" "Stuff from my attic." I opened it. Inside were old photographs, Little League trophies, school report cards, a broken model airplane, birthday cards. Letters Arthur had written to him decades earlier. I looked up. Derek swallowed. "I found them while cleaning." The silence stretched. Then he laughed softly. A tired laugh. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I spent years thinking the house was the important part." I looked down at the letters, at Arthur's handwriting, at memories nobody could sell, nobody could develop, nobody could inherit properly. Then I smiled. "No." He looked at me. "It wasn't." For the first time in a very long while, we weren't talking about property, or money, or ownership. Just choices. The ones we'd made, and the ones we still had time to make. Derek never got the house. He never got the land. He never got the future hotel. Today, 40 cats own a better inheritance than he does. And honestly, they've done more to earn it. Personally, I might have given Derek one final chance before making the decision. But after everything Bernadette went through, I completely understand why she didn't. What about you? Would you have donated the house to the cat sanctuary or given your son one last opportunity? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. See you next time.